There you go. Again, I'm Brooke Davidson, and I'm the Director of Clinical and Family Services at Shoki JFS. So tonight we have a presentation by Christine Montgomery. Christine specializes in trauma and crisis response for children, adolescents, and adults. Christine is currently the Vice President of Community Clinical Services for Clifford Beard's Guidance Clinic. It's a trauma-informed mental health clinic that serves children, adolescents, and adults. Christine and her team from Clifford Beers were first responders for the Sandy Hook tragedy. She established an on-site team in the Sandy Hook community to support parents and children after the devastating event. We are lucky to have her here tonight to guide us in how to best support our children after a traumatic event. Please welcome Christine Montgomery, and I'm sure she'll give you a little bit more of a background as to how she's supported the community she's been a part of.
Thank you so much, Brooke. And thank you for inviting me to attend and to just facilitate this conversation. And I'm going to say facilitate this conversation because I'll provide you with some information, but also I really hope that we get to have a conversation around what's on your mind, what's weighing heavy in your heart, and how to really support our kids and ourselves moving forward. As Brooke said, I've been at Clifford Beers for many, many years. I actually started there in 1995. So I've been at Clifford Beers for 27 plus years at this point, more than half my life, which is amazing to me. It's really been my professional home. Clifford Beers is a clinic in New Haven, Connecticut, and we have about 200 staff. We provide office-based work, school-based work, and lots of home visiting and home visiting programs. And we are a nationally recognized trauma clinic. That national recognition really led to our response at Sandy Hook. We received some calls on the day of the mass shooting at Sandy Hook within hours of the event, asking us to have and develop a team that would be at the ready to provide trauma support on site. And we did that. We, excuse me, we were there that first night. And then what I didn't know in the weeks that followed, we had more staff who were assigned at Sandy Hook under my leadership and supervision. And before we knew it, 6.5 years later, we were exiting and the district was hiring our last trauma clinician to be on site. He's still on site with the students who are now just finished their sophomore year in high school. And so, that work in Sandy Hook really had a really deep and profound impact on me professionally and personally. I had a kindergartner at the time, and the students who were killed at Sandy Hook were first graders. So again, I was very connected in age as a mother as well. And the work in Sandy Hook really led me to expand my knowledge, sent me back to school to get my doctorate. I got my doctorate just over a year ago in social work with really a focus on supporting communities after crises. And again, we do a lot of work with individuals and with families and even in small groups, but sometimes we're called to support a community. And so a piece of my mission at this point is to really prepare the next generation of social workers to respond to these community-wide crises, because unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon, although I wish that it would. I have a number of slides tonight that we'll kind of talk through, and I put them in the chat, but I'm not sure if you joined late. Sometimes you can't access them, so I'm going to put the slides in the chat box. And so as a PDF, you should be able to download those for future use. And Brooke, feel free to attach them to the recording for the future. So for now, I will share my screen. And again, this is just my title and my credentials, and Clifford Beers, which we are now Clifford Beers Community Care Center. As we've grown, we've changed our name as well. We are a 108-year-old institution. We've been around for many, many years. In addition to my work at Clifford Beers, I also teach in the social work department at Southern Connecticut and formerly at Sacred Heart University in their social work department as well. So, what brings us here tonight? So in kind of thinking about today, this really has become these graphic images has really become our world over the past 20 years. And I'll go back to 9/11, which is the center top photo that so many of us remember. And really over the past few years, the chaos in our world has left so many of us at times feeling sad and hopeless, even scared for our children, scared for their future. And I would have never thought that we would be facing a global pandemic, obviously COVID-19, but also school shootings and community violence and racial unrest, war. These have become commonplace for our children, and they really may be inundated with images of this chaos and madness through the news and through social media. These events often happen at a workplace, at a grocery store in Buffalo, at a university, folks attending a music festival, and unfortunately, children attending school. Often these events are known by their name. We know 9/11. You can think about, where was I when that happened? And many of us have like vivid memories of where we were and what our concerns were at that point. Katrina, obviously, that's another type of a disaster, a natural disaster. Paradise wildfires, Virginia Tech, Pulse nightclub, Sandy Hook, and now Buffalo, Uvalde. And again, I'm unfortunately of the belief that this will continue. And then you add in the past couple of years, really, this global pandemic that has significantly disrupted the lives of all of us and of our children over the past 2+ years. And so for all of those reasons, I do think that it's important that as parents and as guardians and caregivers, that we really have the capacity to support the most vulnerable in all of this, which I will say will be children. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and just, my next slide is really, just asking you, like, what's weighing heavy on your heart at this point? What are your continued concerns about the kids and families that you have, that your own, and also that you work with? Feel free to unmute yourself and let me know what's kind of weighing heavy on your heart.
I work with coworkers even that have children that have mentioned that their kid is just afraid to go to school, after everything that happened in Texas. And they're wondering, how do I comfort my kid without making false promises, but still find that way to still make them comfortable?
Yeah. So like assuring anyone that they're safe, right? We have to somehow believe that we are safe in order to leave our homes and go out into the world and send our kids on the school bus and hopefully greet them when they get off, bouncing off the school bus at the end of the day. So in order to really do that, we have to believe that there's some safety in the world. But gosh, the chaos of our world lately really makes us question that. Yeah, absolutely. So, and we'll talk a little bit about how we kind of balance the what you said around false promises and really not wanting to overly commit and overly promise safety, but also provide a sense of security at the same time. It's really a tricky balancing act. Yeah, absolutely.
And even with nightmares, if there's any guidance on, kids that are experiencing nightmares at night, how to comfort them.
Sure.
And find that balance of, do they sleep in my bed? Or do they sleep back in their bed?
Mm-hmm.
It feels safer to be near me.
Sure. and we may want them safer, right? I mean, I know, so I'm also a mom. I have a 14-year-old now, but there's times when I want to pull her close too. So it isn't just that, she wants to be near me. I also want her near me. And so again, as parents, is that the right move? I have a longtime colleague who said, well, they won't always want to sleep with you. And I do think that's true. So I do think that in these kind of vulnerable times, if that is happening, I do think it's okay to comfort them, eventually get them back in their own space, obviously, and they're back in their own routine. But, I don't want to tell anyone that, pulling your kid close when they're having a nightmare is the wrong thing to do. It's the total opposite. You really do want to provide a sense of safety, a sense of security, and that may be in your bed at that point. Absolutely. So, yeah. Anyone else? Any fears or concerns, things that are weighing heavy on your heart that you're hoping I discuss tonight?
And you're also welcome to type it in the chat if that's a little bit easier, if you don't want to have your voice recorded. I can also monitor the chat. So if any questions come up as we go, I can certainly let you know.
Okay, I'll do that as well. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, and so just so folks know, I'm in my home. I have a daughter here, a dog, 3 cats, and a significant other. So if you hear chatter in the background, I apologize for that. But again, this time of night, I am at home. So I really wanted to just kind of talk with you a little bit about the potential reactions. So Brooke had already mentioned being afraid to go to school and nightmares and things like that. So, there definitely are potential reactions that you may notice in yourself, but also in your children. And what I really want to stress around that is that these types of reactions that we'll talk about are really normal reactions to stressful events. And there has been lots of stress. The good news around most of these reactions is around 80% or so, will dissipate on their own without even formal mental health intervention, but just with having a buffering parent and caregiver support. And I guess I want to repeat that. Most of these symptoms and reactions that we're going to talk about will actually dissipate on their own without formal mental health intervention. And so I just want to kind of talk through what some of the types of reactions are that you could potentially expect to see. And I broke them into different buckets just to make it kind of easier for us to kind of think about them. So starting with kind of the physical type of reactions, what you could notice, again, either in yourself or in your loved ones, is kind of this jumpiness or edginess to you, and like an agitation. You may also notice an increased startle response. By that, I mean that you're like, whoa, you have like this elevated response to a noise or something such as that. You might also notice craving for sweets, and that you have an increased desire for caffeine, that you never quite feel rested. As adults, we may have increased desire for caffeine, nicotine, alcohol as ways to kind of cope. Some of the other physical symptoms that you could experience or your loved ones could experience are really cardiovascular symptoms, where you feel like your heart is beating excessively fast and you kind of can't catch your breath. That you have even rapid or shallow breathing. Again, if someone were to say, take a deep breath with me, it might only get to like stuck in your throat, that breath, and you may just really not be able to breathe as deeply as perhaps you could have in the past. Some of the other physical symptoms that are common are really gastrointestinal distress, like indigestion and nausea and constipation. And then the opposite version of that, diarrhea. Those are, again, all physical reactions. Another physical reaction is really sleep disruption. I'd mentioned fatigue and kind of exhaustion, but just insomnia, having a hard time settling down. And so I think with our kids, absolutely nightmares, right? That's what their sleep disruption might look like. or they perhaps aren't sleeping as deeply, maybe not nightmares, but like just not able to sleep as deeply, that they have a lot of worries on their mind, even when they're trying to sleep at night. And so maybe again, getting them out of bed in the morning is more challenging. And you're like literally have to pull them out of bed because their sleep is disrupted in the same way that perhaps your sleep is disrupted. Some of the other kind of physical symptoms that could happen are even like muscle tension or pain, headaches, stomach aches. And even if you have any of your own health conditions, you can have a worsening of kind of your chronic health conditions. So again, whole host of potential physical reactions are normal during these stressful times. In the kind of emotional reaction bucket, so depression and sadness, tearfulness, quick to cry, anxiety, fear, guilt, shame, numbing, feeling hopeless, even just panic that people can't necessarily control, impatience and anger. And I'll say that later we'll talk about being a parent during this. Like we get to be human also. So we may not always be showing up in our most patient self because we're also maxed out. So how we kind of handle that is going to be important as well. Some of the cognitive reactions that you could again see in yourself or in your loved ones and in your children is really a disbelief that this is our current world situation, or excessive worries or rumination, or really being so preoccupied with the situation, having just such a difficult time focusing and making decisions and kind of moving things forward because you're just so stuck on the concerns and the worries. Behaviorally, you could see a change in your sleeping habit where you sleep too much or too little, a change in your diet, again, eating too much or too little, withdrawing from folks, starting to isolate. Often, especially as we're like heading into summer and you have more time together as a family, perhaps there could be increased conflict in your family or outbursts or aggression with your children. And also, trying to kind of over control our relationships or over control their friendships, where they're really, out of, again, worries and fears that really want to know where everyone is, what's going on. And just, again, just really being very hyper vigilant around that. And finally, the last kind of bucket, if you will, of reactions that I want you to consider is really the spiritual reactions. And so, regardless of your relationship with God and how you define who God is, you might experience a change in that relationship. You may have an increase in faith, or you may begin to question your faith. Like, why would my God let this happen in our world? You may find a change in your religious practices, or that you're no longer as prayerful or attending services. That can sometimes be a reaction to this type of trauma and stress as well. And I also think there's times when, especially I'll say our teenagers really begin to struggle with like the meaning of this, and is there justice around this issue? And is this fair? Kids, teens in particular, are very focused, I would say these days, on kind of justice and fairness and equity. And so, again, these are very normal reactions to these really stressful times. So I think knowing that these are normal reactions and that the stress just kind of really has been like kind of chronic and continuing at this point, it's important to determine if these reactions are short-term in nature or perhaps ongoing and maybe will require some additional intervention, either through by talking to your pediatrician, considering a mental health intervention. And so, in general, I like to really say that if this type of like heightened reactions really stay present beyond 30 days or so, that it really is then time to kind of think about who you can talk to, or who perhaps you can have your child talk to about their stress, right? So any other thoughts, Sherbrooke?
So I know that a lot of children wind up experiencing separation anxiety after traumatic events.
Yep.
And it can be really ongoing after the 30 days span.
Yep.
Do you have any strategies for parents that can help them when children start clinging on, constantly need to know their parents' whereabouts?
Yep.
Texting all the time.
Yeah. So we're going to talk in a couple moments about how to kind of handle a few of these different things. So I'm going to if I don't cover that enough, we'll circle back to that question. Absolutely. So what I want to really talk about next is like, how do we talk to our children about, the chaos in our world, the madness, the wars, the social unrest, the school shootings, the political division that we see, like all of it, right? And so, really, it's so vitally important that we start the conversations. And so, when we are silence really suggests that the events are like too horrible to even speak about. And so it's really important that we start the conversation with our kids and our teenagers really about what have they heard? What do they already know about the event? This may be that they've gathered from their friends, that they've gathered from social media, that they've gathered from clips of the news, but or that they've even experienced, if they, God forbid, have been in the event that you're concerned about. What do they already know? And as you're kind of listening to them, I encourage you to listen really carefully and try to figure out what he or she knows or what they believe. And as your child kind of explains, listen for like misinformation or misconceptions, and very gently really correct that misinformation and really try to identify their underlying fears and concerns. And that's, again, very gently. I can think of a situation recently where, my daughter was asking me about, there was a stabbing in a Fairfield prep student died within the past couple of months. And she was asking me about like this, these youth at a party and knives, and is that part of going to parties? And so again, like, really having to kind of, as your child's asking questions, do your best to answer as honestly as you can in an age appropriate way. And so, in that situation, I shared with my daughter that, that yes, I mean, in general, when parties are happening with teenagers, things can get out of control, especially if alcohol is involved. So again, use a little opportunity for some education around alcohol prevention and alcohol awareness. And so again, gave her the best information I could in that moment. But I also don't want her hiding in her room and not experiencing life in our world. And so again, really, it's important that we encourage our child to ask questions and also answer those questions as best as we can. Take time to provide the correct information in simple, clear, age-appropriate language. Obviously, the conversation I have with my 14-year-old daughter today is very different than when I was very involved at Sandy Hook, and she was like, she knew that I was getting home later, and where was I, and told her that I was helping where a really bad thing happened at a school. I mean, again, she was 5 at the time. So, I didn't want to talk to her about a school shooting. That's too much for her to understand. So again, just really as best as you can, answer their questions and really, keep the conversation going as much as you can with your child. This is the question, I think, Brooke, that you asked earlier. So your child or your teen may have some difficult questions about the incident. They may ask you, is it possible that something like that could happen at your workplace? Maybe that you're not safe. Could it happen at their school and they're not safe? And so, they really, this concern about reoccurrence is a real thing, and it's a real thing for all of us as parents. We want our kids to be safe when we put them on the bus, and we want them to come back. And so while it's important to kind of discuss the likelihood of the risk, that's a time when you really want to review your plans around safety and keeping safe. And, do you know how to reach each other? We're also committed to our cell phones. Do they actually know your phone number? Do they have it committed to memory? Something as simple as that may be something to focus on while you're weaving through this conversation. Is how can you reach me? Where's a meeting place for us if we ever got separated, if there was a hurricane, if we got separated at a festival? Again, really, those types of family planning around safety are just a really, really good idea. And so number 5, I really talk about limiting media exposure. And I know I put sounds impossible. I know, I get it. I truly, truly get it. Again, having a teenager myself, media coverage can really produce increased fear and anxiety, especially in children and especially in young children. They may not realize this is a replay of an event. They may think this event is actually happening again. So, especially the graphic images and the news stories, especially if there's about loss of other children. As much as possible, we really have to protect young children, I'll say 6, 7 and under, from these images, protect them from these images as much as possible. And I say that by, I know I'll speak again about myself as a mom. Often in the morning, as I'm getting lunches ready, drinking my coffee, getting ready to start the day, I have the news on in the morning in the background. And I'm kind of paying attention, but not really. And so, and again, at dinner, as I'm getting ready to cook dinner, wrapping up, doing again, my nightly routine, maybe to have the news on. And so again, just something as simple as that is a way that you could limit media exposure by putting music on instead, putting on the home and garden show, whatever works for you. But again, limiting news coverage as much as possible. Even when kids seem engrossed somewhere else, they're likely watching and listening to what we're watching and listening to, at least enough. And again, especially when we're talking about these kind of large scale events like school shootings or something such as that, kids will notice that. Kids will pay attention to that. So older kids, obviously, they watch what we watch, but they also get a lot of their information from social media. And I know that. And so again, when we know that older kids, our teens in particular, our tweens and teens, I'll say, if we know that they're watching the news or getting access to this news through social media, it's again, going back to number 2, what does your child already know? Starting the conversation, not being silent around it, and really discussing the news stories with them. So again, so they have permission to kind of share their fears with you, their concerns, etc. I also just really want to encourage you to be a positive role model. And what I mean by that is share your feelings about the events with your child or your teen. They may not know that it kind of gives them permission to talk about being afraid. It gives them permission to talk about being angry. It gives them permission to talk about the injustice of the world. Again, when there was a lot of racial unrest a couple of summers ago, I'm not suggesting it's solved, but again, when there were murders murders happening of Black and brown people by police. It was important to have conversations around safety and justice and what that was like. So, expressing your own sadness, expressing your empathy for the victims and for their families. That's the way that we are positive role models for our children during these really, really difficult times. And then finally, as I mentioned before, about accessing mental health support or your pediatrician if the distress is really kind of lingering beyond 30 days or so. So just again, the reminder around that. So I know so this is about talking with your kids. I guess any questions from there, or did that kind of spark anything for you? Okay. And so the good thing about all of this, again, is that we do heal through relationship. We heal through relationship with each other, with our own loved ones, and our kids heal through relationship with us as their parents. And just kind of like we are all wired to connect. And so, thinking about attachment, we call that attachment or wired to connect, right? Attachment in relationships. Under most circumstances, typical circumstances, we all really have the capacity to engage in a positive attachment or relationship with others. In particular, infants and the parent or caregiver, really provides a sense of security and safety. And during these kind of unsettling times and chaotic times, it's important to kind of revisit that kind of sense of security and safety. And to do that, we really help to regulate our own affect, modeling our affect, our arousal, and they'll then model and regulate affect and arousal kind of connected with us. So, a really easy tip for me is when things kind of get escalated with my daughter, when they have gotten escalated with her, I try to get quieter. So then she can regulate her affect and her arousal, and she might want to hear what I'm saying. So she might quiet down to hear me. But that's just a way that we by regulating our affect and our arousal, we can then work towards healing together, right? And it really promotes the expression of feeling, which then enhances our ability to kind of communicate. So again, I remind you of that infant and child, because we can think about how we comfort our infant and child. Sometimes in these times, it's important that I don't want to say we're not babying our teenagers, but again, really, providing them with a sense of security and safety. And one of the ways to do that is to attach with them and to offer them hugs, to ask if it's okay to hug them, all of that. We know that kind of that practice of reassuring kids and creating stronger connections really helps them to increase their own capacity to kind of cope with stress, which ultimately leads to their better ability and better patterns of healthier regulation moving forward. And so again, we heal through relationships. They're going to heal through their relationships with you. The other piece that I want to say, so number 5, repair after rupture. So if or when trauma and stress really disrupt the relationship, it's important that as parents, we repair the relationship. So as parents, we have to give ourselves permission to make mistakes, to say it wrong, to not be comforting, to not maybe regulate our emotions as much. Again, we're human also. And so it's so important, especially in today's times, that we then focus on a repair after a rupture or a misstep in our relationship. I wish I could say I always practice what I preach, but there's times I'm snarky and snappy with my daughter because I'm tired, I'm irritable myself, right? And so after that, I will say, hey, I was pretty snappy with you earlier and I'm sorry. So again, I check in at night a lot. And so the question around nightmares, a kid settling down at night, that check-in before bed, is really, really a helpful thing. And it also might give you an opportunity to kind of repair any rupture from earlier that day. So anyway, questions about that or any thoughts about healing in relationships and repairing ruptures? Okay. So my final kind of conversation for us tonight is to really, part of the way that we have to stay ready to take on these challenging times is really to practice our own self-care. And I came across this graphic. So as a mom, I know, especially in the early days of COVID and while I was in school getting my doctorate and working full time, I graduated during COVID. So, COVID, homeschooling, doctorate, working, craziness, right? I know that I neglected my own self-care during those times. My own needs came not first. And so somehow though, within the past couple of years through COVID and kind of working from home, I came across this graphic and things really began to shift for me. So I'll use myself as an example. Again, owning that I did not always practice appropriate self-care. And so I love this graphic because you can tell I like these ideas of buckets, and again, it's similar to our earlier conversation about physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. So for me, physically, sleep is very important to me. And it's also a really good barometer of when I'm not doing well, when my sleep is very disrupted. So really tending to my own sleep. I ended up getting the Calm app on my phone, and they have sleep stories as part of the app. And so, Matthew McConaughey reads a sleep story at night to me. That works, by the way. So again, something as simple as that, I found myself sleeping better by, again, doing something that I would tell other people to do. I also I started walking instead of commuting. Once my daughter was on the bus, a couple of neighbors and I started walking in our neighborhood. I'm lucky and privileged to live in a healthy and safe place to do that. And I realize that. But if you are also, and you have the capacity, absolutely getting outside, starting your day with some physical activity, putting some physical activity and physical release into most of your days is really what's called for. And that emotional self-care, so the words forgiveness, compassion, and kindness, I try to offer those to others regularly. What I ended up doing with that is really talking about my own self-forgiveness and self-compassion and self-kindness. Again, we've all been handling so much in the past couple of years. So not only being compassionate and kind to others, but also being compassionate and kind to ourselves. In kind of the social bucket of self-care, I really love to now rethink about boundaries. In the early days of COVID, it was easy to say no to everything because you had a small bubble, small circle that you were interacting with. As things have opened up and loosened up and all of that, being overcommitted is a very easy thing to get to. So whatever you can do to really think about your boundaries and think about your support systems and are the people that I'm with actually, adding to the quality of my life right now? Again, positive social media. There's been so much on social media and much of it is negative. And so whatever you can do, people can't see when you unfriend them or hide them from your news feed, do that. Whatever you can do to keep your social media conversations and connections positive, that's really something I suggest. And then finally, kind of the spiritual domain of self-care. For me, connecting to nature has been very important to me. And I would love to say I go for a hike all the time. I'm walking, but what I have been doing, I love sunsets and sunrises. Sunrise, not necessarily in the summer because it's so early, but in the winter months when it's really cold, the sun is rising at 6:30, 6:45. I'm up and beautiful sunrises. So I would take my cup of coffee and I would stand near the window and I'd watch the sunrise. I also ended up doing a lot of sunset and beach walks with my daughter during COVID. And so that became something that was really part for both. And I felt like, again, I was modeling some of that for her. And she's literally said to me, "Hey, Mom, can we go for one of those like sunset beach walks? I feel like I need to go to the beach." And I thought, well, that's great. One, that my teenager wants to be with me. That's an amazing thing, right? But two, that she gets that that has been part of self-care for us during COVID. So whatever you can do to kind of connect with nature, find some time, create a sacred space is so very important. And so, again, I encourage you to really think about, like, what qualities make you your best self? What motivates you? How can you keep your best self going? Because again, these are definitely challenging times. What makes you happy? What provides you strength? So if anyone wants to share any of their thoughts about self-care, maybe we'll do that before we move on.
I would say for me, I always look at, is my life balanced? And that brings me kind of that calmness as well. I'm a therapist and I talk to my clients about looking at life as a pie chart. And I say, when everything's kind of equal or in that right proportion, that's kind of when you know that you've found that balance. And it doesn't mean that everything is split and divided equally, but it has to be that equal proportion of what's right for you. So if you value your friendships, your family, your self-care, and your job all equally, then that should kind of all be 25% of that chart. And then when you find that something is outweighing the others, and maybe your job is 75% and everything else is kind of crunched in that 25, then you kind of need to maybe reassess and kind of figure out, how do I find that balance again? But I find that that also kind of trickles into that self-care in some way as well, and just helps the overall functioning. And it's a nice visual, and you seem to appreciate the visuals as well.
Yeah. And so this is something that, like, I've shared dozens of times. I do some other training in our agency and in our community. I've shared this with parents before, with teachers, with providers, those of us who do this work. I love this graphic. So I encourage you to use it, to take it, move it forward, and all of that. And yeah, so please do that. And so then finally, so tonight, I wanted to just also, I used to overshoot on my own self-care plan. Like, I'm going to walk every day. I'm going to hike every Saturday. I'm going to get a massage once every 2 weeks. Like, I'd come up with these self-care plans that were just beyond my capacity to actually successfully implement, and then I was feeling like, I'm so bad at taking care of myself. And so it's really important for me, as a mom, as someone who does this work, to really find many moments of self-care. And so I want to walk you through and kind of round us up tonight and end tonight by just taking a brief moment of self-care. We call this a body scan, and I will walk you through it. And so I'm going to just encourage you to kind of get settled in your own chair and in your own seat. Allow your body to settle into a comfortable position. You may close your eyes or keep them slightly open, but if you keep them open, I encourage you to kind of cast your eyes down a bit. And just take a few deep breaths. For me, taking my first breath in is usually not very deep, and then a longer breath out, and a breath in, and a longer breath out, and one more breath in, and a longer breath out. And now we're going to bring our attention to our body and notice the feeling of the weight of your body on your chair or your floor or wherever you were sitting. And as you breathe, take a breath in and a longer breath out. Now we're going to begin our body scan by bringing attention to the top of your head And noticing any sensations in your scalp at all. And travel scan down the back of your head and maybe to your jaw where you're holding some tension. And if so, part your lips and maybe wiggle your jaw back and forth just a bit. Let your face be soft with a breath in and a longer breath out. And now notice your neck. Perhaps you need a couple of neck rolls to loosen up your neck. And notice your shoulders, a place that maybe you hold tension as well. Let your face be soft. Let your neck be soft. And here we go. Deep breath in and a longer breath out. Now traveling down towards your heart. You may want to put your hand on your heart. Feel it beating. Breathe in and a longer breath out. And now bring attention towards your abdomen. Notice your stomach, maybe some tension or tightness. Maybe you skipped dinner because you jumped right into this meeting. And again, breath in and a breath out. Now traveling down your legs and your thighs. Notice any tension there. Finally, bring attention towards your feet. Notice the sensations of your feet against the floor. Notice any weight, sense of temperature, or energy that you perhaps have in your feet. And again, a breath in and a longer breath out. Just going to encourage you to take a few more deep breaths before I bring you back. Breath in. And a breath out. Breath in. And a breath out. And now I'm going to encourage you to rejoin. And I guess my question is, what did you notice with that quick body scan, that quick breathing exercise? What did you notice in your body?
Your heart rate slows down the more you breathe in and out.
Right. And so that was about 3.5 minutes. That was not a long time. And so again, we can do these own kind of scans, right? And just again, if we know that our kids are kind of agitated, this is a type of activity that you could do with them also, and I call it the body scan. And I again, scanning like that, like using a wand from the top of your head down to your toes. Like, again, those are the types of things that you could take this type of a body scan and use it for yourself, but also use it with your loved ones and with your kiddos. So these mini moments of self-care have really, really made a difference for me, especially in the past couple of years. And so I really do encourage you to focus on your own well-being, your own self-care, because only then can we truly be present for our kids when they need us, in those moments when they need us. And then finally, the last thing I really want to share with you tonight before we kind of wrap up is, so this is a great quote that I've come across in the past number of years. So it's by Fred Rogers. So Mr. Rogers, right? When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing that there are so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. And I love that quote. And one of the reasons why I share that with you is, again, there's been lots of chaos and it isn't necessarily slowing down. And so while we don't want to over promise and give false promises, we can also focus on the helpers, and that there are so many caring people still in the world. And so finding that is as like maybe that type of a message can be also helpful for you and your kiddos moving forward. And that's about all I've got tonight.
Thank you so much. I just want to remind everyone that it's recorded, so it will be posted as well as emailed out to everyone who signed up and attended. And I just think it's a great presentation to just have, you know, unfortunately, as these things keep occurring, it's something that it's just so helpful to continue to access. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and take good care.
Absolutely, you too.
Alrighty, bye.
Bye.